everyone, it's Tay, and today I'm going to start relearning art, specifically starting with rendering. Before, how I would render is to either cell shade and just do the very basics, or more recently, color and rely a lot on the blend brush to hide my mistakes because I didn't know the actual forms of the shadow that I'm trying to create. I've always admired such pretty artwork and rendering from artists like I don't know how you pronounce it. I've always admired such pretty artwork and rendering from artists like Idolro, the creator of Toilet Bound Hanako, Sam Does Arts, and Blue Biscuits. I think rendering is one of the biggest things holding back my art, so that's why I want to work on this now. This will be our reference for today. It's a piece I found on Pinterest by the user M4UW74, which I also found on Instagram, but I'm not sure if this is their piece or not. I'm going to be using it for our pose reference, and in terms of rendering, I'll mostly be focusing on the skin for this one, and less on actual clothes. I won't be doing a background either. I'll be doing 2 illustrations of my characters Sho and Rei, since they both have different skin tones. I think I'm more comfortable rendering dark skin, so I'm looking forward to trying to render lighter skin as well. Starting out, it turns out that my screen wasn't recording while I was doing the line art, but here's a time lapse of the sketching process. For perspective, I tried my best to copy what I saw in the reference and remember that the farther away something is, the smaller it's going to appear, while the closer something is, the bigger it will be. Specifically, I had to remember this when doing the hand, which I struggled with for a second. Once I finished the line art, I kind of just dove straight into coloring. I start off by blocking in all the base colors, so I did the skin, the hair, the shirt, and the eyes, and then I moved on to also picking the colors. When shading skin, especially for dark skin tones, I lean more into the reds and pinks when I color because, I don't know, it just looks better with dark skin. So I picked a color that was a bit darker and redder than the base, and then I moved on to coloring the cheek area, and then slowly worked my way out, layering the colors on top of each other. I had the area around the eye sockets be the darkest since the eye sits deeper into the head, and the areas like the forehead and below the cheeks lighter because it sticks out more. I continued to tweak it and layer colors on top of each other until I had something that I was happy with. And then I moved on to coloring the eyes, which for the eyes you want to pick a color that's off-white. I pick one that's yellowish and kind of close to the skin tone but desaturated because I feel like it looks better since eyes aren't really a perfect white anyway. After doing some touch-ups, I moved on to rendering the hair. The hair was a bit tricky, but I just tried to keep the roots and the ends of the hair darker while keeping the midsection lighter to add some depth to it. I definitely could have done more with this, but rendering hair was something that I never really got quite into, so I'm definitely going to have to work on that in the future. I used 3 colors for the hair, and it was the base, another brown, and then a darker brown on top, and I switched the darker brown to a more reddish color. I moved on to rendering the rest of the skin, like the arms and the legs, which was pretty straightforward since I just followed the lighting and shading that there was in the reference, rather than how with the face I kind of made up my own rendering. So that was pretty easy. The clothes were definitely the hardest part for me, probably because in my sketching phase, I drew the clothing folds all random and didn't actually understand how they worked. So I colored the shorts, which went pretty smoothly, and then when I got to the shirt, I struggled with it for a while before ultimately deciding to just wipe everything and try again with the sketching, which honestly helped, and I was able to get something I was a bit more happy with. I'm definitely going to have to work on rendering clothes and figuring out how clothing folds work more, but I did get something I'm happy with, so I think it turned out okay. I think the funnest thing to render was probably the peach, just because I really like drawing fruit and it was fun to mix the colors together. I picked a more grayish color and then added reds and yellows to try and give it more of a peach color. I kind of just followed what the reference had, but I used the blend brush to try and keep the colors a bit more cohesive, which I do use the blend brush a lot, and I was trying to get away from that, but I feel like in this case it just works well. And with that, I finished the piece, so here is the full time lapse of sketching and coloring. For our second piece, I'm drawing my character Ray, who has really pale skin, so I was nervous to move on to rendering. The reference that I'm using for this one I found on Pinterest, and apparently is the manga cover for a series called Promise Cinderella that I've never heard of. As you can see here, I started by drawing my character Cole, but I got frustrated with his hair per usual and decided to just move on and change it to Ray, who I wanted to draw more anyway. When drawing hair, I try to remember the big shapes rather than individual strands, which really helped me out when I was sketching. Line art was pretty easy, and I just tried to keep it loose and not be too particular about my lines because I feel like in the past that's what's made my artwork look stiff. Next, I moved on to rendering, and like the other piece, I blocked in the basic colors before moving on to the blusher on his face. It took me a while to pick the right colors for this one because I'm used to drawing dark skin, obviously, and the colors that I normally pick are a lot more red, but for lighter skin characters I found that the colors actually lean a lot more into the oranges and the reds rather than the reds and the purples. So after I figured that out, it was kind of a bit easier, but I definitely struggled with the skin in the beginning. You can see how much I struggled because I keep flipping back to my other piece trying to figure out how I colored the other one because the colors were really throwing me off with the paler skin tone. Once I figured it out, I actually ended up having a lot of fun coloring his skin, and I ended up adding a lot more red around the eyes than I did with Sho just because I thought it looked better, and it kind of reminded me of the way Toilet Bound Hanako skin is rendered, which is probably why I did it. Once I finished with the skin, everything else was pretty much smooth sailing, and I didn't focus too much on the clothing, nor did I add a lot of detail just because, one, the hair and the pants and the tie were all really dark black, so I didn't really feel like I needed to add that much rendering to make it look detailed, and then the shirt was a lot easier to render than it was in the other piece, I think just based on the way I did the sketching. And that is the end of our second piece. Here's the time lapse. I ended up having a lot of fun coloring the skin for these, and I think I'm going to have a lot of fun in the future once I improve. I definitely learned a lot on picking colors, specifically with the lighter skin, and I think I'm really going to improve as I continue to practice. I definitely think I've learned at least a little bit about rendering skin, and I'll use what I've learned to hopefully make my pieces better in the future. And with that, here are 2 finished pieces, and if you got this far, I just want to say thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll be out with a new video soon. And with that, I will see you all next time. Goodbye!